It is the 11 Dubcast. I am Johnny. He is George. And I can't tell you what just happened because, according to me, it was an impossibility, right?
Well, before we get into what was a jubilant weekend for the Ohio State faithful, let's bring it back briefly to last week when
let's do that.
We started the show and I kind of opened with a very sarcastic, "Oh, I'm so excited for the game that's coming up," after, stewing in, grief over the last
spending
2
weeks
just
weeks angrily
and
staring at the
sky. You tried to bring us back up with a very genuine, "I'm excited, I'm looking forward to it."
That's
I'm Johnny Good Vibes over here. And then out of all the staff at 11 Warriors, there was one Benedict Arnold in our midst. And who else would it be but the eternal pessimist, glass half empty Ginter.
Right.
That's what they're calling him now in the 11 Warriors forums and comment sections.
I still think...
How could you, Johnny?
I still think the greatest comment anyone ever made about me on 11 Warriors is that it was the quote, "Johnny Ginter is eternally hedging at life," which I think is like an exact... I think that's exactly who I am as a human being. I did foolishly predict Ohio State to lose.
Try to get bold.
Yeah, and there are people roasting me on 11warriors.com for it.
The thing is, I know exactly where it came from too. You wanted to pick Michigan to win so bad.
I did.
You just couldn't bring yourself to do it, even though you had the best scoring prediction from the week compared to the rest of us by far.
Correct.
But the remorse and the guilt from not following through on that compelled you to, in the very next game,
that's right,
try to double down, and you got
cowardice
bit in the butt for it.
By the way, I'm also getting kind of eaten alive in some of these comment sections, which is definitely, again, deserved and earned. I am not going to back away from it. Ginter picks Buckeyes to lose, and other news: water is wet, sky is blue. And that was kind of mean. But then the same commenter came back like a half hour later and said, no, he hasn't taken enough of his medicine. And said, Ginter, I love that my last name is in quotes.
As lowercase.
Yeah, that's right. Is just trying too hard to be that guy. All the satire in his writing, he is close to being the Desmond Clown show of the writing staff. If that isn't a wake-up call, I don't know what is. I will never wake up. I will be stupid for the rest of my life. I'm going to write the dumbest
the Desmond
things.
Howard of anything is just that is a takedown from which it is very difficult to recover.
Yeah, it doesn't feel great. It hurts, It's something that I'm never going to live down. But like I said, I will never stop being dumb. I will never stop being stupid and having the worst takes. So congratulations, everyone who's going to listen to the next 57 minutes of this.
The silver lining is, if you were ever going to be so wrong about something, at least it was a result like this.
Hell yeah, man. And that was the thing. I do take a risk when I bet against Ohio State. And by bet, I mean just say that they're going to lose, because I don't bet because I'm stupid. But
you just hedge at life.
I just hedge at life. The silver lining is, obviously, you get, I think, one of the worst losses in Tennessee history, which is really funny. And then one of the best wins, I would have to say, that Ohio State's had in the past several years. I mean, if you really think about it, since 2020, this is the one I think Ohio State can really say that they were just dominant against a very good team from start to finish and just blew them the hell out of the water. It was sick. It was incredible.
Well, I would say certainly this season. I mean, and yeah, probably within the last 5 or so years. Certainly, probably since at least the Clemson CFP game in 2020. I would say this was the most emotionally satisfying win, coming from somebody that said they were already emotionally checked out on the season. But I would say what really made this feel as good as it did was that one of the big consistent criticisms that we've had of this team all year is that they've made a theme of absorbing the best blow from their opponent early and then kind of adapting to what's going to allow them to separate themselves in the second half and come away and win.
Instead
There
of like
was no
asserting themselves from the beginning.
Yeah, there was no slow start in this game. They just came out and whooped the dog piss out of them from the jump. Smokey went home on 3 legs. Like it was bad. And it was great. I loved every moment of it.
Yeah, I mean, it was complete dominance start to finish. We'll get to one
except for the moments when Kirk Herbstreit was talking, but
we'll definitely talk about that later. There might have been a small moment of doubt, I guess, for some pessimists leading into the half.
So there was a moment where you were clinging to hope that you would be vindicated in your prediction of downfall.
Yes, I was like, oh my god, I hope they lose this game. I got to keep my average up on our on our predictions tally.
If Day chokes this away, it would be so funny. I hope it happens. Said
everybody on the Dubcast will say I'm so smart. Everybody's so happy for me. Here's the thing that I want to say, just to kind of start off with. We'll go through the game kind of quickly, and then we'll have a lot of other things to talk about. First of all, I do want to set the stage a little bit. Tennessee fans talked so much smack leading up to this game about how they're going to take over Columbus and how they weren't ready for the SEC.
Nayland North, they said.
Nayland North, yeah, all that stuff. And like, again, I don't really fault them for saying that kind of stuff. That's, beat your chest, do what you've got to do. It's just
in hindsight, it feels like that given how down that program was for so long, they kind of missed being able to participate in the boat of like the SEC fans that were like consistently getting one over on Ohio State, whether it was LSU or Alabama or Florida, like all these teams that were consistently beating Ohio State in the postseason. And now Tennessee, 15 years after the fact, finally has their shot to be. Now it's our turn to take a dump on the Buckeyes. We've been waiting for this for so long. And
that is exactly what I was going to say, because it felt like it felt like a fan base that was like a little too excited, right? And they kind of lost the plot a little bit. And then when their players came out shirtless, I was like, hang on a second. They're acting like a team that has never been here. This is different from playing in Alabama or Georgia or something like that. This is a team and a fan base that is so giddy with excitement, and they think that they've got this in the bag because it's Ohio State, and Ohio State's playing an SEC team, and they just lost to Michigan. We're getting them when they're down and they're sad, and we're just going to stomp all over them in Columbus. And I was like, hang on. And that's when I saw that. And when I saw how Ohio State, that first couple of plays that they called, I was like, wait a minute, this is going to be a little bit different than I thought. One of my favorite tweets from the game is when they came out with like shirtless and stuff like that, which is still hilarious because they were still wearing their balaclavas. I
didn't even realize that they did that until after the game had ended.
Well, I was, because I do the social reactions post. So I was like following all these tweets, and then I saw immediately somebody say, this is like what teams do right before they get their ass kicked. I was like, that's true. And then I saw them with like their balaclavas on, and I'm like, wait a minute, you're still kind of cold. So the whole thing was really, the vibe seemed off for a team, which props to their fans. They brought a ton of people to Columbus. I think they deserve all the credit in the world for jumping on that pre-sale, for bringing up a butt ton of fans to Ohio Stadium. I'm not going to downplay that at all. I think they did a great job supporting their team. But I'm with you, though. It really felt like a fan base and a team that thought they were kind of like dogpiling on. It's like, it's over, guys. This is different than what you're remembering from the early 2000s, the mid. This is going to be a whole different situation.
It was an interesting like lead up to the game for me being in SEC territory, because all of the fans of various SEC schools that I talked to during the week were in. It was a totally different world than how the atmosphere felt for this game online and on social media, because there were, if you only went off of what was going on in the digital sphere, you would have thought the entire SEC was rooting against Ohio State.
Oh, I know. Yeah.
When in fact, based on my own personal experience with talking to fans of both old school SEC teams like Georgia and new school SEC teams like Oklahoma, everybody was rooting for Ohio State, in fact, for the sole reason that they were annoyed at the big-headedness that Tennessee Volunteer fans had, like their swelling head size relative to the last couple of seasons. And, there's a trope in football of, relative to like when a guy gets in the end zone and he does a celebration after scoring that would merit like an unsportsmanlike conduct. They talk about acting like you've been there before.
Right.
Tennessee was not acting like they had been there before.
No.
Even though in some, they're talking about this program being, one of the best in the history of college football, and they certainly weren't acting like it relative to, this new stage and this new era that they found themselves on. And the other thing I'll say too is that, I'm pretty sure I mentioned this on the show last week, that I wasn't sure whether I was in doubt at the beginning of the week that the weather was going to play a big factor. We talked about how not just the South, but a lot of the country's kind of dealing with a cold spell right now. It was 35 degrees this morning in South Carolina. So it gets cold, in a lot of places around Christmas time, this time of year. But as the week went on, and there were a couple things that happened that started to make me reconsider. One of them was when this wasn't related to the game itself, but watching Kyler Murray do interviews before the Cardinals went to Charlotte to play the Panthers this weekend, and they told him it was going to be 35 degrees, and he was like, "Oh, I've played in cold weather before. How cold is it going to be?" And the reporters told him 35 degrees. He was like, "Oh, shit." He just couldn't hide. I was like, "Oh, maybe this is going to be a bit of a difference." But then the big thing relative to this game was when they got pictures of Volunteers practice, and they were practicing indoors in shorts. I realized they're not taking this as seriously as they need to.
Yeah. And the thing is,
this is going to come back to bite them.
Right. And a lot of Tennessee fans online were like, "Well, yeah, it gets cold in Knoxville. I mean, it's cold right now." I'm like, I know. I don't think anybody disagrees with that. And
you ever been knocked out of your shoes in the cold, though?
Right. And I think it's kind of a cumulative thing. But here's the other thing. This is like, I was seeing statistics after the game. Like, this is the 5th coldest game that Tennessee has ever played in. Like, Ohio State's been playing in freezing or near freezing temperatures since October.
Where'd you get that stat from?
I don't know. Somebody had it on Reddit.
Those things.
Yeah, somebody had it on Reddit, and they probably went back as many years as they could.
The gospel of Reddit.
I know, right? It could be complete BS. I'm not going to say that's not a possibility. But my point is that Ohio State's been playing in cold temperatures since October. They're used to it. Tennessee's been playing in 50-degree weather, I guess. But, like, this is their first game that they've had to play in this kind of weather all season. So there is a difference between teams that have acclimated to it versus teams that this is their first time trying to hit and get hit in this type of weather. And I do think there's a difference. Now, do I think it made a difference in the outcome of the game? No, because they could have played this in Hawaii, and I think Ohio State still would have won by a lot, right? Like, I think they would have won by multiple scores.
I don't know if it would have been a boat racing. I mean, I think in a more controlled environment, it probably would have been more aligned with a lot of what the people that picked Ohio State to win were at 11 Warriors were expecting, which was a game very close to within the spread that Ohio State ends up winning. None of us picked Ohio State to break 30.
That's true.
So
well,
it was, so as much grief as we're giving you, Johnny, it's not like any of us were super close relative to what Ohio State ended up doing. Although some of us did predict that Tennessee would score 17 points. So it's neither here or there. Who could have possibly foreseen such a thing, I wonder?
That's true. All right, let's talk about the game a little bit then. Ohio State, here's one of the things that I had been clamoring for weeks, which is tempo. And I had been super irritated about how slowly Ohio State had played, particularly in games like the Michigan game or Penn State, even though that turned out well.
Or every first half of every game this season, going back to
Right.
Akron.
Yeah, and the fact that, like, I mean, you look at the Nebraska game where they had, like, I think functionally 44 offensive snaps. That, to me, that's unacceptable. You had to play faster than that, especially when you've got skill players that good. So they did. They come out. Chip Kelly, Ryan Day say, "Screw that. We're going to go no huddle sometimes. How about that?" And each of the first 3 drives that Ohio State had for touchdowns didn't last. I don't think any of them lasted more than 2.5 minutes. I mean, it was bam, 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 bam. They were huddling sometimes, but they were mixing in a lot of tempo with what they were doing.
It was refreshing to see them remember they had Jeremiah Smith
Yeah,
available to
right.
them.
So the game starts. Howard. There's the first bomb to Jeremiah after the face mask penalty, which, it looked like they weren't going to get off the field and sustain a drive and they were going to get off the field.
Yeah, I don't want to go as far as to say that face mask like turned the game around on its head just because of how early in the game it was. But
Sure.
if they don't get bailed out on that penalty, you do wonder like,
oh, it definitely helps
different
the
script. You do wonder how different the script of the game is. There's no guarantee that Tennessee is able to get any momentum going on offense on their own if Ohio State is forced to punt in that situation.
Right.
But I can't help but wonder how different the start of the game would have played out if they hadn't gotten bailed out by what I felt was a letter of the law call. There's no reason to let a face mask penalty go, but there have certainly been more egregious examples of face masks, particularly in college this year, that have been missed and not called.
I think the issue with that is that it very visibly turned Will Howard's head, and because of that, there's no way you can kind of just like look the other way.
And I'm not saying it should have been excused.
Yeah.
I'm just saying in the pantheon,
it was a close thing.
Face masks, right?
No, yeah. I totally understand what you're saying. And I do think that it had an impact on the tempo of the game because they were able to sustain that drive. They immediately, they go right down, they score a touchdown. Jeremiah Smith, that's the thing. It's not like they ground out a touchdown. They like threw a dagger, right? Like that was, and I think that kept Tennessee wrong-footed for the rest of the half because they're like, oh crap. Like they're not, this is not the team that we game planned for, right? This is not the team that showed up on the Michigan footage. This is something else. And if you watched, I listened, I didn't watch, but I listened to Kyle Jones' film breakdown on the way back home from work tonight. And one of the things that he said is that Ohio State was doing a lot of things differently. And the first time I got an indication of that was I think just a couple plays into the game where they did one of those screen passes that they've done in the past where it's like a little flare out to the flat and then they just have one of the receivers block for another receiver. That went for 7 or 8 yards every single time they've ever done it. And when I saw them go back to that a play that I have not seen in several games, like in a long time, I was like, they're doing something different. And I think you saw that for each of their first 3 possessions. They were going to different types of blocking for run plays. They were getting, obviously, Jeremiah Smith a lot more involved in the passing game. Tennessee, I think, felt that they could leave their All-American corner on an island with them, and that was a horrific mistake. Their defensive backs were completely outclassed. And then, I think the first 2 volunteer series were 3 and outs, and their first 3 series together totaled 11 yards. So the defense was just keying on them. JT Tuimoloau had an unbelievable game. I mean, he was all over the place. Jack Sawyer had an incredible game.
I'm going to be honest. It felt like the first game, at least the first big game I can remember, where Tuimoloau and Sawyer both showed up.
Yeah.
Feels like for their entire career that they've been bookending it, it's been one or the other. It's never been both.
Right.
But you felt both of them in this game early on, and it was very, very refreshing. Couldn't have come at a better time for them, especially at this stage of their careers where they're both getting ready to wrap it up. So it was great to see.
So you've got Tennessee that's going 3-and-out, can't get anything done offensively. Ohio State is just bam, bam, bam. I mean, they're just slamming them with Jeremiah Smith. That one catch, Josh posted one of the pictures of I think it was from the second touchdown drive that Emeka caught, where it's like Will Howard just by literal centimeters was able to thread the football above the head of the I think it was a linebacker that was covering him, maybe a safety, just like right over this guy's head. But I gotta say something, earlier today I was listening to the radio and Tyvis Powell was saying something to the effect of, the real difference here is that the Ohio State coaches started to trust the players. And I think that has a huge amount of truth to it. I think what's happened in the past is you've had Chip Kelly and Ryan Day say, okay, this is our scheme, right? This is our ideas. This is what we're going to do. We're going to try to get our players to execute it. Here, it feels like we have these players. We know what they're capable of. Let's let them cook. And I feel like there was just more trust put into Will Howard, put into Jeremiah Smith, put into Emeka Egbuka to say, you guys can go out and you can win these one-on-one battles, and we're going to trust that you do that. And to me, that made all the difference in the world, especially in that first series of play calls and things like that, where it's like, we know these guys can do it. We're going to let them cook. We're going to let them score touchdowns. And then that changed the entire tenor of the game. And then all of a sudden you're up 21-0 at the end of the first quarter, and it's basically over.
Yeah. I agree with all that. I will say I don't know how much they've I feel like they've trusted their players pretty much the entire season, that the confidence has never really waned. The Michigan game, I still feel like, was more of them just trying to fit a square peg into a round hole in terms of proving a point. I don't think that they were overly committing to the run because they didn't trust Will Howard to execute. But so I don't know if I necessarily agree with the glorious Tyvis on that front.
How dare you?
But it definitely, it felt like that they at least heard, or if they didn't take into account what the criticism was coming out of the Michigan game, that they at least recognized where they erred during that game,
Yeah.
and
And you
saw
heard that
that
from
we need to call a completely different game on its face from the jump if we're
Yeah,
going
and
to
you heard
put
that from
ourselves in the
Ryan
best
Day, where he
position to
said they
win.
identified, parts of their game plan that needed to improve, that they needed to change. And I mean, they did. I mean, this is completely different. I know that some people are like, well, where the hell was this team, against Michigan? But, unfortunately, I think that's just part of the learning process.
I think what also helped was having all this time off in wake of Seth McLaughlin's injury really gave them more time to assess how can we put the offensive line in the best position possible to be
Right.
successful, as opposed to Seth gets hurt in the run up to the Indiana game. Next week they got to play Michigan, which is quietly one of, if not the most challenging defensive front that they've had to face all season, and they're doing it a week and a half removed from losing their best interior blocker. They don't pass that test, but they're taking that test shorthanded under dire circumstances, and being, not only are they not passing the test, but they're being leaned on to pass the test in a way that's not necessarily fair to them and isn't playing to the offensive strengths, so it only magnifies the issue. Then after that game, they get 2 or 3 weeks to assess what went wrong and clean up those series of errors, work on their chemistry together, get a sense of what they need to do to be successful interior blocking. In this case, they felt comfortable doing a rotation of guard play. Day was complimentary after the game, saying that it felt like all three of the players that they were rotating in those guard spots had good enough games to the point that they're going to keep rolling with that strategy against Oregon.
And I think Luke Montgomery in particular, I mean, he was a racing dude. So he did a fantastic job.
I was kind of surprised his name didn't come up more, like when they were trying to figure out whether they should run Hinsman at guard or Shrevfeld in wake of when they said they were going to slide Jackson over to tackle. I was surprised that his name didn't come up earlier this season when they were already trying to reconfigure alignment on the offensive line. You wonder if he was necessarily prepared for the opportunity at that time or not, and if maybe this was kind of more out of necessity in wake of McLaughlin getting injured. But I was still surprised that given the kind of I feel like he had much more attention coming out of high school than Shrevfeld did. I had honestly never even really heard Shrevfeld's name before this season, really. So I was surprised Montgomery didn't come up, but I'm glad to see him contributing now, and I think that he's going to continue to have a strong playoff with good momentum that carries into his future for next season too.
Another thing that Kyle Jones pointed out in his film review is that they went from a zone blocking scheme to a more gap blocking scheme. And I think that's what this group of guys working in tandem are much more naturally inclined to do, if that makes more sense. And part of that is because you're missing a guy like, McLaughlin in at the center position. And I think they had to figure that out. I think they had to realize that they couldn't continue to block running plays the way they had been doing. They had to change it up.
Zone blocking is much more sophisticated and reliant on not only just the experience of knowing what to do against various different alignments, but you have to have a very good set of chemistry with the people you're lining up against, because so much of the concept is just knowing when you're both getting, a hand or what have you on the primary option right in front of you in terms of a blocking assignment, who's going to go next level, who's going to stay at the first line and take care of the defensive lineman. It's a very tricky thing to figure out on a play-by-play basis, especially when you don't have good chemistry with the people lining up next to you.
Right.
Gap blocking is almost strictly just knowing assignments and not really having to, like, you know what your role is going to be before the defense really even lines up on a play-by-play basis. You just know the general area that you've got to be in, and you're not having to figure out as much or worry about, okay, can I stay home or am I going to be the one that has to go to the next level, like you do with a zone blocking game?
Less thinking, more hitting, and just,
yeah, a lot of NFL teams have great success with it, but that's because you're working with NFL caliber players and minds that are able to pull something off like that. When you're playing on a line that is missing 2 of its 5 best players, arguably, you are going to have to kind of keep it more simple for the less experienced parts of that line. So I think it's good that they went back to something that was more basic.
Right.
And even though it might be easier to prepare against that in the case of a team like Oregon, and we'll see how they kind of continue to shake things up as the playoff goes on, I think for where this team was at going into this game and coming out of the Michigan game, it was the responsible thing to do to put the players in the best position to succeed as a coaching staff. And so I commend them for doing that.
Yeah, I agree. And you saw that with how Henderson was able to spring out some big time runs. Kyle pointed out that one of Tennessee's problems as a defense, and even at a defensive line, which they have a great defensive line, but they over pursue. And so you saw a couple times where Travion Henderson would get stuffed in the middle, but he immediately bounced out to the perimeter because he knew that he was going to be able to get the edge. And you saw that a couple times. And it resulted in 20, 30-yard runs. So, I just think overall, this was an Ohio State team that completely had Tennessee's number, both on offense and defense. Ohio State's defensive line was just annihilating Tennessee's offensive line, which I think people didn't talk about enough in the lead up to this is kind of like bad. Like they did not have a good offensive line. Nico Iamaleava was getting just run around the entire game. The dude, I mean, I give him a lot of credit for being like hanging in there and playing a really tough game, just taking hit after hit. But he had no rest. I mean, he was getting harassed the entire time. Between the two of them, Jack Sawyer and JTT had, I think, 3.5 sacks. So, he was just harassed all night. It was bad. It was really bad for them. I think he finished with he was like 14 of 30, something like that, like just over 100 yards passing. It was pretty rough night for them.
2 cracked helmets.
Yeah, 2 cracked helmets. We just saw the other one, I think, earlier tonight, rather.
I had never even seen one in a game, let alone 2 from the same player. So that was, that really speaks to how much stress he was trying to deal with.
And I think they missed Dylan Sampson a lot. He only had a couple carries. He didn't look good on those carries. I think he was nursing an injury that, in retrospect, some Heupel was kind of like, oh yeah, he was dealing with it. We thought he'd be better than he was, but he wasn't. He tried to play through it. He couldn't, blah, blah, blah. But in the absence of any real running game, they just, Ohio State just teed off on the Tennessee offensive line, and that was pretty much it. And so second half was pretty much the same as the first half. I think some people might have been a little bit nervous. I saw a little bit indication of that on 11warriors.com where, going into the half, you're only up 21-10, but like, oh, here we go. Ohio State's going to turtle. They're going to, Ryan Day's going to go into just coward mode. Like, no, they came out of the half.
Wishful thinking from the Fire Day crowd.
That's right. And no, they came out doing the exact same stuff they did in the first half. They came out throwing bullets and just scoring more touchdowns. And it was honestly, the second half looked very much like the first half. It was almost a carbon copy where Ohio State immediately started throwing bombs. It worked. And, Will Howard, I mean, God, 24-29, 311 yards, 1 complete BS interception. I mean, that whole sequence was infuriating.
The first half could have been even more of a blowout if that sequence doesn't take place or if it gets officiated correctly.
I mean, least. For love of to miss the pass interference to me bothers me more than the call over the interception. But then,
and it was very, very funny that Chris Fowler and Kirk Herbstreit didn't even acknowledge the DPI until the rules official,
had to call it out and say like this dude was mugged before the ball was even close. And then they erase an Ohio State interception with just one of the most ridiculous roughing calls I can imagine. I don't know what you do if you're Kenyatta Jackson. I don't know, like, how do you tackle a quarterback?
You are not. You have to breathe on the quarterback correctly, or else it's going to be called a personal foul.
But this isn't the NFL. Like, I've never seen a roughing the passer penalty called because of that kind of tackle in college football. I didn't even think that rule existed.
No, it was nonsense. It was bad.
It was really bad, and like that's the other thing. If you rewatch that play, Jackson actually has momentum because he's pushed from behind by a Tennessee offensive lineman. He trips over the guy's shoe and the guy pushes him, trying to get him away. And that's what exacerbates his fall into the quarterback. And it's like, what? That
wasn't even an egregiously timed hit. It was like right after the ball had been released, and there was no helmet to helmet contact. It just didn't make any sense.
Yeah, it was complete bullcrap. Like I said, as was the Howard's interception. So aside from that, Howard
he did not have a foot down for that either. By the way,
I don't think he had possession either.
If that had been called an incomplete pass on the field, I think the play would have stood just as easily.
I agree. I don't think he had possession by the time that his feet were still down. I don't think that was even close.
And that was the moment during the night where I started getting upset with Kirk Herbstreit because he was trying to will that call to be an interception so badly. You could just hear it in his voice. ESPN was given the marching orders. Like we can't have a fourth blowout in this first round.
That's right.
Damn
Well,
it.
we're going to talk about that.
We need a competitive close game. At least one.
We're going to talk about
it's got to be the SEC team. We can't, God forbid, that one can't be a blowout.
Yeah, I mean, that was pretty egregious. So anyway, Ohio State continues to coast. The fourth quarter is a laugher. I mean, the game's completely over halfway through the third quarter. The rest of the game's kind of a laugher. Tennessee gets a garbage time touchdown that nobody cares about. But still, hey,
I care to help my scoring prediction.
that's right. There you go. One person cared. Obviously Ohio State and Ryan Day needed this. This was a vindicating win in some ways. I wouldn't say vindicating. I would say more like a job preserving win for Ryan Day. It's something that he badly needed as a head coach.
Real quick on the subject of the fourth quarter, how did you feel about Devin Brown getting trotted out there again?
I'm fine with it. I don't, whatever. It's
even after already having declared for the portal.
I'm fine with
okay with them not giving Sayan more reps. The guy that
given the one pass that Julian did throw, yes, I am. That was the worst throw I saw from anyone all night. I think Julian Sayan actually was probably more impacted by the weather than literally anyone else.
Wouldn't that guy, presumably, the guy making throws like that, presumably need to get more comfortable in game experience, and instead you're giving it away to Devin Brown?
No, I think it's fine because, I mean, he said that he's going to stay with the team through the playoff. And, if that's the case, then you're still on the team. So whatever. And I'm sure, this is not the time to try to be vindictive, right? Like let's do everybody happy kind of thing, and I'm cool with it. Give him some reps, let him talk about it to his kids, like whatever. It's all good.
So if Will Howard gets injured against Oregon or in any game after this, you feel comfortable with Devin Brown being the guy to get them to the promised land?
No, absolutely not. I don't feel comfortable having Julian Sayan being that guy.
Between the two of them, who gives Ohio State the best chance to compete at this 100%.
Stage? But I don't think a couple garbage
That's my point.
I don't think a couple garbage time snaps against Tennessee is really going to do a whole hell of a lot.
You got to do everything you can at this stage, man.
So anyway, big time game. I think this serves as a proof of concept for what they're going to try to do against Oregon. If they come out and do exactly this against Oregon and they still lose, fine. I have no problem with that. You gotta come out guns blazing the way they did against Tennessee. And if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. But this is the version of the Ohio State Buckeyes that will win a national championship, right? It's the version of the Ohio State Buckeyes that gives them the best chance to do that.
I sure hope so.
That's what I want to see. And if they go back and they say, oh, we got to play conservatively, we got to control it. No, screw that. Just throw the freaking ball to your
Not against Oregon.
Just do it. All right, so we'll get into some other aspects of this game. We'll talk a little more about the college football playoff as well. Before we do that, we're going to do Ask Us Anything and remind you to check out the dry goods store at 11warriors.com. Shirts, hats, stickers, all kinds of stuff. I'm not wearing one of the 11 Warriors hats, but it's just because it keeps me too dang warm, and I don't want to start sweating on the Dubcast. So I'm just putting that out there. It's a great product. Let's go ahead and do Ask Us Anything. I want to remind you that you can ask us literally anything by sending us questions to dubcast@11warriors.com. This first one is from our good friend Alvin, who wants to know which sport is tougher, 1v1 soccer on a soccer field, half the size of regulation one, or 1v1 on a basketball court on a high school size court. I say basketball.
I would have to say soccer because you need a goalie.
Well, 1v1.
Are you playing with a regulation goal?
Yeah.
That you're basically having to play goalie on top of defender and attacker.
See, I'm going to say basketball because 1v1 soccer, I've done this many times, right? Because I played soccer for a long time and that was like one of our drills. Really, what you do is you wait till somebody gets close, you kick it away from them, and then you just run away. You just run around them and then kick it at the goal. Like, it's not that hard. I'm going to say basketball because people just hack the hell out of you when you do 1v1 basketball. Like, that's just a foul fest. So I'm going to say that because I'm a wuss.
I mean, the same thing can apply in 1v1 soccer. There's no ref in
That's
either
true.
situation, you know.
I didn't hear no red card.
If you take a dive in 1v1 soccer, who's gonna, you know,
It's true.
who's
You just
gonna
roll
run it?
around.
Who's
You're
gonna
like,
enforce penalties or anything like that?
good point.
I on strictly on the fact that one's a 5v5 game under normal circumstances and one's 11v11. When you reduce it to 1v1, there's more assignments that you have to be responsible for in soccer than there are in basketball.
That's true.
In
That's
5v5 basketball, you're having to play offense and defense regardless of, you know, the shrinking it down. Soccer is more assignment based, and then you're having to turn it into a. So yeah, I think it's very easily soccer in that case, honestly.
All right, I think that's a fair point. I can see that argument. Next one here. This is from Bryant. Yes or no to eggnog, and if yes, with or without cinnamon, or with or without bourbon.
One of the great tragedies of living in the South is there's no Oberweis. Their eggnog is nectar from heaven during.
So you were definitely pro eggnog then.
Oh my god. And I didn't like, I remember the first time I tried it as a kid, I was like, oh my god, this is so terrible. But then I think during, it might have been either a couple years before or right around when the pandemic had, well, it would have been before the pandemic. So the pandemic started in February of 2020. So maybe it was like right before then. But there was one Christmas around that time 5-6 years ago where I got glass Oberweis bottle of that eggnog, and it was
over.
I mean, it's unbelievable. That stuff is just
so
incredible.
Do you go with the cinnamon or the bourbon? Do you get into that?
I can just drink it straight up, dude.
All right.
But I mean, I know my mother prefers to have a little bit of whiskey in the eggnog.
Okay.
So I can't knock that. I've never tried it with cinnamon, but I'm sure that would be quite delicious too. I don't think you can go wrong. I mean, it's an incredible holiday beverage. Can't recommend it enough. I wouldn't want to have anything other than Oberweis though, because Oberweis has it's like drinking Guinness in Ireland. You can't have any other variety of it anywhere else once you've tasted it at that level. It's just it's not even close to anything else.
I'm okay with eggnog. I don't love it, but I'm fine with it. You know what? I don't know that I've had Oberweis though, so I'll have to try it. I'll have to try the best.
You're in the Midwest. You have to take advantage of it. Serve it in a glass bottle and everything. It's incredible.
I'll have to get some of that going here in the next couple of days.
That's right, sir.
This next one's from Kevin, who says, guys, are you disappointed there will be no Air Noland era at Ohio State? Air Noland, by the way, we found out is going to South Carolina. So he'll be in your neck of the woods, George.
That's right. I celebrated, or not celebrated, but last year, if you were listening to this show a year ago, you'll recall me championing Air Noland 2024. That's right. Who I wanted over Will Howard and everybody else. So I am devastated. And in fact, I sat on my way to took a brief flight over to visit my grandfather for his 95th birthday this past weekend. And I was in the air on Friday night while the Notre Dame Indiana game was happening. And so I paid for the in-flight Wi-Fi. I was watching it on my phone, and the guy sitting next to me on the plane asked if he could tune in too. And, you know, because I'm generous, I said, yeah, sure. And I ended up finding out that this guy graduated from Ohio State 4 or 5 years ago.
Oh, cool.
And one of the things that we talked about was how we were both very disappointed that Air Noland was probably about to transfer out, and how we both wanted to see Air Noland play at Ohio State. So it was, I'm not alone in wondering what might have been relative to Air Noland. I am sad to see him go, but I wish him all the best, even as he departs for an SEC team.
Yeah, I mean, I am too. I mean, I also was a big fan of Air Noland. I just liked his tape. I thought he had, a really cool. First of all,
he was the most impressive quarterback at the Ohio State spring game, arguably.
That's true. Super accurate in high school. I like the fact that he's a southpaw. I thought he was, Kenny Guyton Mark II, and I was like, hell yeah, I'm down for that. I think he'll be successful at South Carolina. I wish him the best, and I am sad he never got a little bit of run at Ohio State. But it's a really crowded quarterback room, and I understand how that all played out. And when you
With
get
his
Julian
legs, he's going to be the next Joe Burrow relative to leaving Ohio State and winning a Heisman Trophy at an SEC
I wouldn't be
school.
sad about that if Aaron Noland ends up, kicking ass in South Carolina.
I mean, it would be unfortunate to have two quarterbacks within the last decade leave Ohio State and win Heisman trophies at SEC schools. But
yeah. Speaking of portal stuff, this is from our good friend Alvin. If you have a player in the transfer portal, should they be allowed to play in these games, in these college football playoff games? So in other words, should Bo Pearl, I think he's going to Missouri. Should he still be allowed to play for Penn State?
I'm very conflicted because what the true answer to this question is the portal should not be open while the season is still going on.
I absolutely
even though
agree
we're
with that.
technically in the postseason.
Yeah,
and this has been a thing that's been commonly criticized very regularly during the CFP.
One portal period. Make it in the spring, and then that's it. There does not need to be
I don't even
two.
know if there has to be one, but you should not be opening the first portal period immediately after the regular season ends.
I agree. I think that's ridiculous. I think it just causes way too much chaos. I think it's stupid as hell.
If you want to make a case for players that are committed to leaving, getting to stick around for their teams during the postseason, yeah, I guess fine. That being said, I don't like that Ryan Day gave opportunity to Devin Brown to put some more tape on his portal resume this past weekend. But, all Devin Brown really has anyway is just 3 and outs in the fourth quarter, and he got another one against Tennessee. So it's, neither here or there, I guess. But I will say, too, I think that if you haven't committed to another team yet, you should still be allowed to play. But if you're in the position like Penn State's backup where you've now made it known that you're going to another program, in this case, Mizzou, I think at the point where you make a decision, you should be cut off. It's like, all right, you can't have one foot in both camps. You got to either piss or get off the pot.
Yeah, so. I'm with that as well. But yeah, I agree. I just think it's insane to have the portal open right now.
Yeah.
This is from Joshua F. What is the oldest thing you own?
Ooh.
I was thinking about this. I have some coins and stuff from the turn of the century. One of my grandfathers gave me a not really a coin collection, just a bunch of coins that he had accumulated. I don't think he knew what any of them really were, but some of them were from the turn of the century. But beyond that, I guess my house, which was built in the early 1910s. So I would have to say, yeah, those things.
When I was, I don't know where it is now. It's been lost to the sands of time, but by sheer circumstance, when I was at I was at the baseball field where my town league, when I was in 3rd or 4th grade, would play all its games, and there was another one going on, not one that I was playing in. I just was there watching a friend or something, and I found on the sidewalk there was this coin, and it was encased in this paper note that was explaining how the coin, you could tell based on the marking, it was almost completely smoothed over, but it said that this coin was from the late 1700s.
Whoa.
And I remember holding on to this thing ooh, this is valuable. Maybe I could be able to sell this or something. But clearly, so that's why it's funny that you brought up coins. Clearly, so this fell out of some poor coin collector's prop pocket, and I just happened across it as a young lad. And I remember putting it among all my other souvenirs that I would collect, and it might even still be in that box even though I've since
That's
changed
cool. You
addresses
should get
several
it.
times.
Yeah, you should figure out what it is. That's awesome.
I haven't seen it in.
No.
I mean, I was in third or fourth grade when this happened, so this would have been back in like 2003, 2004, so 2 decades ago at least at this point.
You know what? I actually thought of another answer for this. So when I was a kid, I'm from southwestern Ohio. I grew up near Cedar Creek, and they have a lot of really good fossil like beds and stuff like that. So one popular elementary school field trip would be go to Cedar Creek, especially during like the fall, and you just like pick around in the mud beds. And I got this perfect. I'll have to show it on the Dubcast at some point, but I got this perfect fossil of like an ancient like bivalve kind of thing.
Wow.
So I would say that's the oldest thing that I own. It's probably tens or hundreds of millions of years old. So that's what I'm going to go with. Slightly older than my house.
I'll say too, my I mentioned I was visiting my grandfather for his 95th birthday over the weekend. They my dad's sister and her husband just got a house down by him in Florida, and one of the things that they did right after that was my father's family grew up in a lot of different cities in the country when he was a kid, but they had like a whole storage shed in like Buffalo, New York, of like a lot of their stuff that they had collected over the years.
Mm-hmm.
And my grandfather was he was a big, like, he helped manage like this company that was producing copper, and so they had a bunch of like copper artifacts that were in this storage shed that they dug out. And one of the things that they, like, me and all my cousins that were just down there, they said they had all these copper things that they took out of the storage shed, brought down there, and like, okay, we're giving a lot of this stuff away, so you can have like one thing to take back with you. And so I was like, what is the most obscure thing I can take out of like all of these copper artifacts I'm looking at? And so I got a copper spittoon.
Oh, fantastic.
So I'm going to put it out on my porch. Yeah, I thought that'd be a very appropriate,
especially if you're in South
southern
Carolina,
piece of furniture. Yeah, I'm not a tobacco user in any sense, but I'm going to have a nice copper spittoon out there that's probably, I don't know how many years old. That's probably the oldest thing that I can actually say that I have within my possession at this point. I like that. After this past weekend.
Last one here. This isn't so much of it. Well, it's a series of questions, but this is from Eric, who says, when Johnny picked Tennessee to win, and he was the only 11 Warriors staff member who did, just like the game versus Michigan last year, I was thinking, oh crap, here we go again. Here's his questions. How's that crow tasting, Johnny? May I offer you some barbecue sauce? Do you like sweet or spicy barbecue sauce? Go Bucks. I hope they can keep it up. Much better coaching out of Kelly and Day tonight. I am happy. The crow tastes delicious, and it's nutritious, and it's necessary for a functioning growing boy, which I am. So yeah, I'll eat it. I'll gladly eat the crow because I'm stupid.
Well, the good news is you're not going to be alone at eating crow on this show this week, because Jake Diebler is going to be force feeding me that within the next few.
We don't even have a lot of time to talk about that. We need to talk about this though. The other games so first of all, let's ask us anything. Thanks again for sending those in. Dubcast at 11warriors.com. There were other games that were played. They went straight chalk. I don't think anybody was surprised about anything that happened in them. I kind of expected Clemson to give Texas a little bit more of the game, but Texas just ran all over Clemson, despite them not being able to run over anybody really this year. Indiana got just absolutely just smushed by Notre Dame. Penn State beat the absolute hell out of SMU, which is, I mean, admittedly kind of funny. But yeah, I mean, in general, we're not talking about some shockers that happened this weekend. Do you have any other specific reactions to the other?
I mean, we're going to get into the bigger part of this theme in a second, but yeah, it is funny that with all of the bemoaning that ESPN has done on behalf of the SEC teams that didn't make the playoff in light of the results of the first round, what's kind of being lost in the shuffle of that is the ACC had a really, really bad weekend.
Yes, they did. They had a very, very, very bad weekend.
And nobody's really talking about it.
Yeah. So let's talk about that other item. So we kind of sidestepped Kirk Herbstreit in his commentary throughout the game, but pointedly, before the game as it was starting, where he said there was like 40,000 Vol fans in the stands, which is a wild overestimation. There were a lot, but 40,000 is kind of hilarious. And then after the game and towards the end of the game, where he's talking about how people hate Ryan Day and his comments before the game even started and all this stuff. I mean, my personal take on this, I know a lot of people have kind of made a cottage industry out of hating Kirk Herbstreit over the past several years, which some of it earned, some of it not. My general take on him is that he really loves drama. He loves getting caught up in it. He loves making it all about himself. I've seen that a lot. And I thought about during this past week and during the game, when he was making his comments and stuff, and they kept asking about his thoughts, in relation to Ohio State fans. When Johnny Manziel was playing, he had this whole feud with him, where he would talk about him on game day and say all this stuff about him. And eventually they had this like little sit down, this little, tete-a-tete where they were, trying to clear the air. And I'm like, why is Kirk Herbstreit even a story? Like, why is he part of this at all? And it's because he kept inserting himself in it. He kept egging it on. He kept going on Twitter and trying to like engage with fans who were saying, you need to shut up about it. He's like, I will never stop. Like, I just think that that's who he is. He loves this kind of drama. And it's really unfortunate because I think it takes away from the games that he commentates when he plays into that so much. So I just, I thought it was really unprofessional of him in general leading up to it and some of the comments that he made. And I just think it's an unfortunate part of who he is as a sportscaster. It really sucks that he inserts himself so much personally into these narratives.
I had a very high opinion of Kirk Herbstreit growing up, just because, he, first sports video game I ever had was NCAA football 2002.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's him and Brad Nessler and Lee Corso. And I come to find out just through playing the game and hearing the commentary that turns out this guy is known as the Sunshine Scooter and actually played quarterback at Ohio State. It's like,
yes.
Oh, cool. This is an Ohio State quarterback.
Right.
I already really like this guy. As I've grown older, I've come to realize the sort of, the sort of political, savviness that Herbstreit has employed in building up his career. And I'm not,
he's a company man.
Well, so that's right. There comes a time in our professional lives where we are all faced with choice to either uphold what is right when what is true and what is, more firmly rooted in reality, or if we can do what is in the best interests of the company, whether or not that aligns with what is right and true and ethically correct. And the unfortunate reality of life is a lot of people that align with the ladder end up climbing the ladder, so to speak. And the people that don't are often left behind because they're not willing to put the company and the interests of the company first. Kirk Herbstreit has demonstrated a consistent pattern of behavior in recent years of putting the interests of the worldwide leader primarily above anything else. And he has since used that to build his profile into now becoming this guy that is not only at the forefront of commentary on college football, but is now also doing Thursday night football games for Amazon Prime.
It's definitely raised his stature, right? Like he's become this guy that people like. I think that's his brand, right? Where I am this guy that people are going to look at for this I don't know. End of conversation opinion on college football.
He has built himself up into a perceived authority on
Right.
the sport across multiple levels.
Right.
I cannot help but remember in 2017, the 2017-18 playoff conversation, when there was a firm, fierce debate between Ohio State and Alabama for being the 4th seed. And I remember thinking, and at that point, people had speculated on expanding the playoff, but for the time being, we didn't know how long the current format was going to persist. And this was only, the 4th or within the first 5 playoff instances and selections ever.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember thinking, this is going to be a very important conversation around the way that these teams are considered relative to criteria and go in the coming years based on what decisions are made. Are we more focused on the teams that we feel like have earned the right to be there based on overall results, or are losses wholly damning, and is the timing of these losses in particular extremely important to the consideration? Because Alabama had a loss, but I believe it was to Ole Miss, and it was within the first 6 weeks of the season, and they had since been on a run of winning other games.
Right.
They ultimately went with Alabama, and Kirk himself made the point of it was just impossible for the committee to overlook Ohio State's egregious loss to Iowa in determining whether or not they should be in. And that's fine, if that's the precedent you're going to establish.
Well, and just to interrupt real quick, Ohio State fans didn't agree with that or disagree with that either. I think if you told an Ohio State fan that they shouldn't get in,
I disagreed with it.
Well, I think most Ohio State fans were so pissed about the loss and the way that played out that they were like, yeah, fine.
It was understandable.
It was understandable.
I didn't like the decision, but it's not like it was rooted in total bias or anything like that. Even if we were, oh, of course they're going to go with, the SEC team.
Right. But I don't think any Ohio State fan was like, oh, this is just the system failed Ohio State. I don't think anybody
It
said
wasn't an injustice.
Right.
But what is an injustice is the about face that Kirk Herbstreit did this weekend in wake of these blowouts, carrying water for these SEC teams that didn't make the playoff,
right,
and trying to establish a new set of criteria for the playoff committee and somehow invalidating wins in the interest of picking the teams that are the best, not the most deserving.
I love the way you phrase it too. You said that's what crazy fans do, basically. Lunatic fans are the ones who only look at wins and are like, what are you talking about?
That phrase, the lunatic fringe.
Yeah.
And saying that one in every 5 Ohio State fans is a lunatic.
Yeah.
He has
again, that's what I mean when I say
separated from reality at this point.
And that's what I mean when he says he's all about the drama, because he knows that's going to stir up people. He knows it's going to say oh, I'm going to make this whole fan base look like crap. And Doug Lesmerises said this on his podcast, but he was like, look, you can't lumping all Ohio State fans in. Obviously there's a element of any fan base that gets way too overboard and gets really crazy, but lumping that group of people in with every other Ohio State fan that might have a criticism of this or a criticism of Ryan Day or any of this other stuff and say, oh, well, you're all crazy. Not only is that lazy, but it's weirdly antagonistic. And, some of the other comments that he said, he wasn't, Ohio State didn't congratulate him or his son for committing to Michigan. It's why the hell would they? Why would they do that?
He is swimming in an ocean of hypocrisy between what the situation that just unfolded with his son going to Michigan, him doing an about face from 2017 to now in terms of what he believes the criteria should be for postseason selection. But my personal favorite example of all the hypocritical behavior that he has exhibited over the past week or so has to be him referring to 1/5 of all Ohio State fans as lunatics.
Yeah.
It's like, dude, you cannot question the mental stability of a group of people when you haul an emotional support animal around everywhere with you.
Yeah, it's a bad look, and when you see it, it's one thing from if it's from a commentator, like on game day or something like that, that maybe you see once a week or whatever. But when you're like
or a fine bomb,
yeah, or fine bomb, exactly. Like if you're
but
just
when it's somebody that played quarterback for Ohio State,
well, even more than that, if it's somebody who is essentially the number one color commentator guy for ESPN, right? Like this is the guy that they say is our number one like in game guy that we're going to pick for all of our biggest games. He's essentially going to be our like golden boy for our network when it comes to these gigantic games. I understand Kirk wants to be the loyal soldier here for ESPN, but I think what he does is he takes that and then he mixes it with his own personal animus, and he just lives for the drama, and I cannot. It just drives me crazy. It absolutely drives me crazy.
If ESPN had any sense of self-awareness whatsoever, they would switch his assignment from covering the Rose Bowl next week.
And I mean, they're not, but I agree. I think
no, because they love drama as much as Kirk does, so he'll be on the call for that.
Of course they do.
And if let me ask you this: if Ohio State is beating Oregon in the fourth quarter, do you think he's going to double down on his?
Yes, they'll ask him about it again. Yeah. They'll ask him about it again, and he will double down.
He's not going to walk any of his
I would be very
back.
surprised if that were the case. And because they absolutely would talk to him about it, and even if they're losing, I mean, in any case, they're going to ask him about it. They're going to say, "Hey, what's Ryan Day's status?"
Oh, if they're losing, he's going to do. He's going to.
And he's going to act like he's the authority on the subject, right, which is like, again, the most infuriating part about it, because it's not coming from some objective analyst, perspective. It's coming from the perspective of a guy who loves drama and wants to stir stuff up. And that sucks. One thing we haven't talked about today, and Ohio State men's basketball had like one of their biggest wins, like basically since the Holtman era started.
Well, and the crazy thing, we didn't even really get to talk about it last week, and we were ready to unload both barrels on the whole operation.
I know.
And then all of a sudden they say, "All right, Michi, you're in timeout."
Bruce Thornton dropped 30. Like they were terrible from three. They were just carving up.
Well, that's the craziest thing is that we're figuring they're live or die by the three, and they don't really have anybody that can consistently make them other than Mobley, and they still find a way to beat
they won by 20.
Number 14 by 20 points. Now, I will say, relative to what I said last week, this game was at MSG.
That's right. It was not
technically a road game, a neutral site game, in the same way that the game against Texas was, that they won at the beginning of the season. So the narrative that I laid forth that this team can tread water at home and still get blown out in all of their road appearances, that is still very much on the table in terms of this being a carryover of the Holtman thing. We don't know how this team is going to do in true road environments, but God help you if you have to play this team on a neutral site court, because Jake Diebler is out for blood, whether it's Vegas or New York, doesn't matter.
Let's see how many Big Ten games we can get at neutral sites and just, make a run. It's really hilarious because UK, I mean, they're really good. Like, that's a legit team. It's not like some team that just got up jumped at the beginning of the season. I think they're going to be right there.
Calipari would have never let something like that game happen.
That's right. Of course not.
He just caught them at the right time. The Kalen DeBoer of college basketball, whoever Kentucky's new head coach is.
There you go. But hey, props to Diebler and company. That was a great win. And now you got to try to keep it rolling. And look, a lot of people I think are still not sold on Diebler. I certainly am not. But it's going to be interesting to see what happens and how this team plays going into Big Ten games after the break. Because as was so often the case under Chris Holtman, this team collapsed in January and February. If they don't do that, if they can hold serve a little bit, I don't expect them to win the Big Ten. I don't expect them to even like really be in the top, like, fifth or fourth. But if they can hold serve and they can continue to impress and win some of these games, then maybe they can build on that a little bit. So we'll see what happens after the break here.
And shout out to Roddy Gale for sabotaging Michigan from within.
Hell yeah, there you go. Exactly. I don't know what to expect for Oregon. We're going to talk more about that next week.
Yeah.
The
day before the game, the New Year's Eve edition of the Dubcast. Yeah, the last Dubcast for 2024.
That's going to be interesting. So yeah, we'll have more takes on that as it comes. Maybe I'll predict another Ohio State loss. I don't know. We're gonna find.
I have to, because I already said I think Oregon's going to win the
national championship.
Thing.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah,
you did.
I'm just getting it out of the way now, even out of the most recent result.
Send angry emails to George. Don't send them to me anymore.
Yeah.
I'm sensitive. So that's the Dubcast for this week. We'll be back next week. We'll talk about it. We'll lead into the big time Rose Bowl matchup here. But until then, I'm Johnny.
I'm George.
And we'll see you next time.
Take care, folks.